Well, hello there, David Taylor or Mr. Pelargonium back with another video for the Pelargonium and Geranium Society. Right now today I thought I would actually do a video about growing standard grown pelargoniums. I haven't actually done a specific one for growing standards for quite a while, and I've got a good number here that all need a few things doing to them. So I thought let's just get on with it. So here we go. Well, hello there. It's good to see you again. I thought, as I said, I thought I would just do perhaps another more specific video about growing Pelargonium standards. I haven't done one for a little while, specifically for growing standards. I've mentioned them on the odd occasion, of course, for some of the videos that I've done. So I thought, what a good time now, because there's quite a bit going on with them, and now I've got one or two bits and pieces, a little bit of trimming back, bit of cutting back, bit of training on. So I thought, well, I might as well just film it and do a video about it. So remember that there is a playlist for growing Pelargonium standards. I'll link it here. So you can go to that. I'll obviously put this one in it as well, just for a bit of continuity. So you can have a look at that to see a whole story of videos going back over a number of years for growing a good number of standards. So as well as incorporating a bit of the training which I've got to do, I'll also show you some of the ones which you're relatively familiar with, such as my big scented angel that I've got there that I did tie up. You may remember that. I did a video about that a little while ago, or included it in another video. But I have got a few bits and pieces going on. So if I remove that, that's a Pelargonium San Francisco primary hybrid that I potted on late last night, strangely enough. I will also move out the way my giant unique seedling, which is really getting out of hand. This is, I don't know, it's turning into a monster. It is thankfully throwing some bloom, so hopefully we'll see something from that, excuse my backside, in a week or two. Right, so let's sort of pull out one of my sort of, well, I say relatively young standards. It's not that young, and this really does bring me on to the first thing that you need to know about growing Pelargonium standards or train standards, is that you need to give them time in order to grow a long trunk with a really good full head. Takes a few years, to be quite honest. So realistically, you're going to need to be able to overwinter them realistically in a greenhouse to sort of keep them growing a little bit during the winter. I mean, if you've got plenty of room, say a conservatory or that sort of thing, it could be, that's the ideal sort of winter environment from them. So you will need to give them a bit of light during the winter, i.e. in a greenhouse or something along similar lines. Now, I don't know what it is, I just love growing them. But I think it really is just the challenge of, you know, having grown pelargoniums for over 30 years, just to try something a bit different. And growing Pelargonium standards is I think the mark of being able to grow something pretty good and pretty decent. But it's not that difficult to do. And as I say, if you've got the patience, you've got to, you know, say the space to grow one, it's relatively straightforward if you adhere to a few rules. Now, there are the two sort of, if you like, main sides of Pelargonium to have a go at. There's the zonal side, and in that I include things like stellas and all sort of zonal hybrids. And then there are the non-zonal type, like regals, angels, uniques, that type of thing, which you can grow into standards. Now, without doubt, the easiest type to have a go at are the zonals. And that is purely down to the simple reason that they grow and flower on one single stem. So that makes training a zonal hybrid standard the easiest to do. Now, regals, as sort of everyone knows, it is a sort of very young standard. They grow and flower on separate stems, and that makes training them really quite difficult, particularly in the spring, because you're going to get a side of the plant, well, at very basic level, you're going to get a sort of stem of the plant growing over to flower, and a stem of the plant that wants to continue to flower, but it will throw a bit of growth stem as well. And that can be very, very difficult to sort of split between the two. So realistically, training a Regal in the sort of spring and early summer period is something that you do really need to have a little bit of knowledge about. I mean, I can show you the differences between the two, because I've actually got some young Phyllis down there, which is really a sort of scented unique type, and that needs to have some little bit of training done. So I can show you a little bit about how to tackle something on the sort of Regal unique angel type side. And this is where you have to then consider about when you're going to take a cutting to grow on specifically as a standard, because for a zonal it can be at any time of year. Because they grow and flower on the same stem, as I've mentioned. So they're easy to grow and just can develop and train relatively straightforwardly. But for these Regals, you really need to be taking cuttings in the late summer or autumn and then grow them on during the winter to get a bit of height on them before they begin their flower stem splitting in the spring. Where you will probably have to just bide your time and wait until the end of the summer when you can then begin to sort of retrain them. Now, the other thing that you can do is grafting, but grafting is not easy. I've had several failed attempts at doing it. There is a video up here which I will link, which showed me grafting a Regal onto a scented variety. Now, the two are relatively closely linked in terms of the genetics and the way they grow, so they can be grafted together. Now, the main thing is that example failed, I think, because I think the growing stem was too old for the head that I put on it, or there's almost like the cutting head that I put on it. I think you need them a bit younger. I was using an Atara Rose's main stem, which I think is called the Scion or the Skyon, depending what way you say it. And the head that I used was quite young, and I think they were too mismatched. I find realistically that I can usually get away with growing them on just as trained plants. But I will have another go at doing a graft at another point in the future. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the types of cutting. Obviously, you want to try and find a younger cutting if you want to start directly from scratch. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I've done all that before. Just have a look at the videos on the playlist. But an example of a really young one is down here. This is a plant called Snowstorm, and I actually found this at Pelargonium Nursery at Fibrex. It was just a longer growing plant, and I thought that's ideal for training as a standard. So I've grown it on. I've had this for a couple of months now, and it's growing on lovely. It's lovely and long. Basic zonals are probably a good example of one that will obviously grow fast, but in terms of the type of plant to choose, for plants on the zonal side, I would generally go for dwarf plants because they've got a certain amount of oomph in them to really grow on relatively fast, but they will grow relatively compact to form a really good head, and it's relatively easy to train. Obviously, as I've explained in some of the videos on the playlist there, try to keep as much leaf as possible while this stem is growing, because you want to give the plant, the ability to be able to continue to grow on. That'll probably get to the length or the height that I want it this year, maybe. It's growing away very fast. But that's the type of thing you want. You just want a lengthy cutting. On the zonal side, you want a lengthy cutting, and that starts your process. They will root relatively easily, even on a slightly longer stem, particularly if you do a heel cutting with a little bits of root growing out, which I've shown you before in cuttings videos. So yeah, I mean, it's an easy task. Right, so on this one then, this is a plant called Chelsea Star. It's got a sort of double light pink bloom. It's one of Brian West's plants. Now I'm letting this go really at the moment because the head is forming. It's still nowhere near big enough for what I need. It's been potted up. It's in I think that's an 8-inch plastic pot. So it will stay there really for the rest of the year. I may consider repotting it in the late summer. We'll see how it goes. But just to freshen up the compost a bit and make sure there's no bugs or whatever in the compost. But it's growing away, it's quite happy. Now the only other thing I need to be careful of is side shoots like this. So that, I've cleaned the knife for it already, so I can just nick that out. Side shoots. Once your head's forming, all the side stuff, leaves and everything can be taken off. Right, in a moment I will go outside and show you standards that I've actually put outside in the last few days. And you will see actually a charity with all the side shoots still on because the head's very immature and not grown very much. So that's something to consider. Right, so this one, I mean, it doesn't need a great deal more doing to it. You could argue that I could give it a little bit of a stop, but it is growing away fairly well. I will probably give that a tip stop in a few weeks, but I'm not in any huge rush to get these moving. I mean, they're fine. It's growing away quite nicely. It's overwintered well. So we'll park this one for now. I've got another one there. I've got a Sammy Brown, which is virtually identical. So I'm not going to pull that one out. I don't need to. Now, one that I do need to do some action on, though, is a Mrs. May Last. And I'm going to pull this out. Now this Mrs. May Last needs a little bit of training, and the reason being, you can potentially see that it's got a little bit lopsided. It's a bit tall heavy, that side, whereas this side's a bit more rounded. So I need to do a little bit of stopping just to shape, and this is the sort of thing that you could do. The other thing to consider is it doesn't matter how many stakes you have around the stem. If you need to hold that stem or you find it a bit floppy. This is actually a little bit floppy. I think, when was this last repotted? It was last year at some point. I can't read by writing. 22nd of, it's either June or August. Can't really see, doesn't really matter. So I will probably repot this at some point, just to give it a bit of fresh compost. It's come back to life now. I mean, the other thing with the bicolours, of course, they've really grown on in the last couple of months. Bicolours and tricolours, for point of reference, do not grow a great deal. They don't really like the winter, to be quite honest, and they don't move hardly at all. The key thing is to keep them dry during the winter. But these now, in the last couple of months, since the light's gone a lot greater, have really grown on. So it's not so much an issue. But we can see here I need to do a little bit of stopping on this. So I'm just going to get my knife. It's the same old rules. Make sure that it's pretty dry. Right, so I'm going to do this one first, just to take the tip off. Just below a nice shoot there. You can see that shoot just breaking. There we are, take that off, it's got a flower on it, but I've got loads of these, so I don't need to worry about taking cuttings. Again, I'm just letting it flower, I'm not overly concerned. Now go around this way. I will take this one off. Again, just below a shoot. Just trying to make it, to balance it off a little bit. These I obviously want to grow out. Now, the only minor thing you need to look out for on bicolours is that you're not getting too many ghost shoots, because there is a ghost shoot there, ghost leaf. That's got no chlorophyll in it, virtually, well, a tiny hint in there, but really takes a lot of effort from the plants to keep leaves and stems that are ghosting going. So you need to really try and get them off. You don't want a lot of those coming on the plant. I mean, if it came to the fact that your whole plant began to ghost, you would probably need to get rid of it. And that's with anything, not only a standard, with any type of plant. There's another one there that's pretty much ghosted. So I'll have to keep an eye on that stem there. It seems to be ghosting a little bit. But there we go. I've sort of rounded that off a bit now. I'm obviously not going to touch the low side because I'll let those grow on. It's a question now of whether I want to do something with that stem that's sort of beginning to get to the ball curve here. And I will go down there. I mean, this is going to take years to get to the age that I want it to get. So there we are. That's now bang on where I want it to be. But I have just noticed round here, look at this round here. This is a bit of a concern. See all these ghost leaves here? I will just strip them off for now to see how that develops. Because that one's got a bit more on it, but I will need to keep an eye on that stem. That's a shame, actually. I don't think it's affecting it too much because these are pretty, pretty bi-colour. There's another one there, actually. Hopefully that will pull through okay. But anyway, the main thing that I was wanting to do was just balance the plant off a little bit to grow on. Yeah, so there we go. So that's a bit tidier. All I've done is sort of curved it over a little bit, cut these back to encourage these shorter ones to grow up. They'll hopefully grow on fine. But now you can see though down here, the stem is not dead straight. And I never bother too much about stems not being dead perfect. If it was up against a perfectly grown, perfectly manicured, dead stemmed plant in say a show, then yeah, this would probably not fare so well, but I'm never too concerned about that. Now, the one thing I should mention is that I have got a backup for this plant because there is a little bit of concern, obviously, over those ghosting shoots that we've got. If I go right over there, I've got a youngster, another young Mrs. May Last that I am training. There it is, and I'm just going to insert now a bit of a clip that I did yesterday. I'll just talk over it now. Here you can see me just cutting out all of the side shoots from this plant. Now this has got very dense sort of bicoloured leaves, so there's a good bit of chlorophyll in each of those, so I'm not overly concerned about this one. It just so happens that this large one that we just did a moment ago just seems to have a few ghost leaves appearing on it, which we've stripped off. But this one that I'm cutting back, I'm just taking out the side shoots, which you can see here. Keeping on the main leaves, I mean, that's the thing that you need to try and ensure. Just keep the main leaves going until you start to develop that head, which in this case is going to be a way ahead yet, probably a year or so. So there we go. So that's that one. That's one that I just tipped them out. I just filmed that yesterday while I tipped those out because they was just on the dry side. So that's growing very strongly though. So, I've got a backup, and if you're desperate to get specific plants grown as a standard, yeah, take some backups. That's the thing to do. Now, the other key thing to remember with growing them is that you really mustn't be frightened of giving them a hack if they need it. And I've got another one here that needs a hack. Now, this is a plant of Frank Headley. Now, this is growing sort of quite tall, but it does grow. It can grow a little bit straggly, Frank Headley. It does grow well as a trained form. I'm trying to get a standard from it, and you can see why it's ideal for growing as a trained form because it really does go mad. Now, I've got a number of shorter stems round here, but this one here needs taking out, as does the one next to it, or not entirely, but we've got one that needs cutting back. That entire stem though needs taken out as we got a nice side shoot already growing out from it. So I'm going to do that now. Right, now as I say, I've got this lovely side shoot growing out here, and this I'm going to take right down. I want to get this right at the base. Of that stem where it's breaking. There we go. So that's that entire. I mean, I could get a cutting from that, but I haven't got the room to do them at the moment. And this one here, this is quite soft, so we'll just lock that there. And that's because I am developing the head on this now. So you can potentially see here, this is actually a very long standard. I'm developing the head at about over a metre, but it doesn't need to be that long. So that neatly brings me on to the fact of how high can you make them? Well, realistically, you can make them as high as you want. This boy here, this is Rushmore spotted shrimp, which is flowering away like crazy. There's still a few immature blooms on this one. There's one of them. I'm going to have to get that one out. And it is drinking like a fish now. That's the trouble. I'm having to almost water this every day because it's turned fairly warmish now. But this, I should think, is 1.5 meters high, really tall. So, you know, I'm 6'3". If I just crouch down, I don't like to stand up too much because I get out the view of the camera. But so that's about 5'9", 5'10". So it's a very, very tall standard. Obviously, the taller you go, you've got to remember all the time they become top heavy. So you've almost certainly got to have a heavy clay pot to support a standard of this size. So that's all things that you need to consider. But in the Pelargonium world, sizing doesn't really matter. In the fuchsia world, it's a bit different. They have various size standards. But in the Pelargonium world, you can grow them as short or as tall as you wish. Obviously, it needs to be at least the size of the head above the stem. So your stem needs realistically to be, I would say, at least a bit longer than the head that's eventually formed. So, you know, that's something to consider. I think it would also look a bit stunted as well if it's too short. So with that in mind, we will stick with Rushmore spotted shrimp because there are actually, when it does go solid, it's like quite a deep sort of pink purple colour. And I've grown these on because I think the bloom looked quite striking. So I'm growing these on, and these now are just forming the head. And what you'll find on zonals, if I home into this, so on this one you can see I've got the main stem growing through, which is breaking away, and I've got 2 side shoots coming out of this break here. So this is now going to form my head because I've got 3 coming out and a central one there. I will probably, that's got a double break on it as well, one there, and I will probably nick that out. I will wait though, just to consider my options there. But that's what I will probably do. I'll probably nick that out there. And we've got 2 side shoots that side, central stem, and another 2 side shoots. So that is potentially going to be a good head development. Again, it's grown quite tall, but it is a very, very strong growing variety, this. Easy one to grow. These were cuttings that I took just last year. These were taken just last summer. So these are almost in June. I've just noted the date. So these are almost exactly a year old. What other ones have I got? I've got a few other bicolours. These were obtained from the Fibrex sale last year. And these are sort of almost at a point now where I'm going to develop the head. This is Mrs. Mappin. It's a white single, nothing too flashy, but does grow fairly strong. This now is almost certainly at a point where I will want to, you know, develop the head. I don't need it to get any taller. It's throwing lots of side shoots. That is a metre, is a good 2.5 foot. So you can see there I've got side shoot, main stem grey out there. So I will almost certainly take the head from that one. I'll probably nip that one out In fact, I will. Let's just do it. Might as well do it while we think about it, of course. Wipe my knife. Just nip that side shoot out there. And there it is, done. So there we go. That's the head on that one. That needs to be potted up and a good strong stake putting in it to grow on.